Hi, I'm Vic Vogel. I was laying in bed this morning, as I do sometimes because it allows me to think clearly. That seems to be when I can think the most clearly. So this morning, I was wondering why I feel so strongly about interpersonal communication. It struck me that empathy is its most powerful effect. One of the marvelous miracles in my life is my brain. I cranked up my amygdala and insula and fired off both hemispheres of my prefrontal cortex while I was thinking. It brought two podcasts I watched yesterday into mind, like Only the Brain Can Do. I processed it into my thoughts, two distinctly different podcasts now that pointed out why empathy is so crucial in leadership, why empathy is the foundation for communities. First, I want to share some of a Midas Touch sponsored podcast, the Ken Harbaugh Show, where Andrea Chalupa, a journalist, author, filmmaker, and she also has a podcast. She hosts a podcast, Nation Podcast. Andrea provided the most apparent rationale for the importance of empathy and emotional intelligence, which is actually the interpersonal part of interpersonal communication. Listen to how Andrea relates empathy to what is happening in American society today. Let's take a look at that brief part of that podcast.
These death camps. And that put that whole idea of intelligence into crisis. Like, what does it mean to be highly educated? What is true intelligence? And I think history has shown us that true intelligence, the highest form of intelligence, comes from empathy. I truly believe that like, it's the most advanced countries among us in terms of innovation, in terms of high standards of quality of life, in terms of strong defense, in terms of resilience for economic storms in the world, in terms of COVID. The countries that did the best in the recent years also showed high levels of empathy because they had strong social safety nets. And I'm talking about, of course, the Scandinavian countries. And so I really see that if humanity wants to evolve, we have to move towards understanding empathy as the highest form of intelligence. Empathy is also an act of self-defense. So these MAGA voters thought, oh, I thought Trump was going to kill these other people, not come after me. Well, if you had empathy, you would have protected yourself in this situation. And so that's what we need to lead people to. It's like we need to now exercise our own empathy to lead them towards higher empathy and say, by protecting other people who are vulnerable, you're ultimately protecting yourself. Giving is receiving. Giving is receiving. And that is how we're going to get through these next few years, is carrying each other through this time. There's a saying that I live by: no one gets into heaven alone. Right? There's not a trophy, an individual trophy. It's a group sport. And so we need to now carry each other through this time. It's our empathy that is going to save us.
Andrea's statement, quote, I firmly believe that empathy is the highest form of intelligence, close quote. That clearly rationalizes why interpersonal relationships are critical to the survival of individuals in a community. We all seek to belong in a community because communities are resources for what we need in our lives. Now, I would like to share another portion of a video that is a speech by David Brooks to the Alliance for Responsible People. You might know David as a political commentator on NPR. He also has some personal background that he discusses in his speech, where he mentions that he was part of the well, he acknowledges his privileged upbringing as part of an educated elite. And he kind of humorously reflects on his academic journey and career at the New York Times and his role in elite media circles. David, in this video, says that there's a need for a cultural shift, a moving from hyper-individualism that may be caused by social media to community based in values, and that's essential for us to do. He thinks there ought to be a historical shift in cultural values. Early Christianity and conservative intellectual movements have reshaped society. Meaningful culture change starts with small groups living in a better way, inspiring others, restoring civic and moral institutions. Societies that need moral information and civic institutions to rebuild trust and connection. He said that true transformation happens at the personal, spiritual, and civic levels. He calls for a defiant humanism, choosing empathy and seeing humanity in others, even in difficult times. Let's take a minute and watch that podcast, just a slice of it to help you understand what he was saying about empathy and what empathy can do for society.
When we relate to each other with attentive and generous gaze, Simone Weil said, attention is the purest form of generosity. Culture changes on a spiritual level. T.S. Eliot said, you can't create a system so perfect that the people in it don't have to be good. It's when you put moral formation at the center of your society. And finally, it happens at the civic level. When 1,000 voices and 1,000 different organizations create civic institutions that provide healing and relationship in society. That's how culture changes. I was at a bar about 2 months after October 7th. And if you had seen me there, you would have thought, sad guy drinking alone. I call it reporting. So I'm scrolling through Twitter, and it has all these brutal images from the Middle East. But I come across a video of James Baldwin. And he says, you know, there isn't as much humanity as one would like, but there's enough. And what you've got to remember is that when you walk down the street, every person you meet, you could be that person. That could be you. You could be that monster. You could be that saint. And you have to decide who you're going to be. Now, James Baldwin was treated shabbily by my society because of his race and other things. But he had a right to be bitter. But even in that circumstance, he uttered the ultimate humanist statement. You could be that person could be you. And the phrase that rang in my head when I heard that was defiant humanism. That even in harsh and brutal times, we're called upon to see each other in the fullest, deepest, and most respectful way that God imagined that they would be seen. Thank you very much.
Now, I find it amazing that Andrea and David are both in journalism. Both of them have spent much of their lives observing what caused division and destruction and what helps rebuild and restore institutions and communities. Both of them see empathy as a nucleus, as Andrea said. Empathy is the highest form of intelligence. It begins with granting yourself empathy in order to show empathy for others. When you give, you will receive. The communication process allows you to be empathetic with yourself and others. Your ability to master empathy and communicate effectively with others opens the door to restoring communities where we all benefit from caring for each other. That is the difference between the leadership paradigm today in 2025 and the Renaissance leadership paradigm of the future that I recommend. When leaders start seeing a greater purpose beyond profit and begin focusing on building a community that takes care of everyone in the organization, we can restore a civil community. Then you have more than a business. You have a community that strengthens each other. That community can better serve society. I'm going to leave you with Andrea and David's thoughts, and I hope you will watch both of these podcasts. And then I want you to rewatch them and study them for what they offer as a person, a leader, a community, and a society. Till the next video, I'm Vic Vogel.